Move. Business class isn't for people like you. The words didn't float. They didn't drift across the cabin like an awkward misunderstanding that could be walked back with an apology and a smile. They landed hard, flat, and deliberate the way only words do when the person saying them has said something like them before and gotten away with it every single time in every single room across every single year of a career built on the assumption that no one would ever push back hard enough to make it matter. Captain Bradford Whitmore stood at the cockpit doorway in full uniform, platinum blonde hair cropped close and threaded now with silver at the temples. His captain's hat held loosely in one hand like a prop he didn't need but carried anyway because props were part of the performance. And Bradford Whitmore had been performing authority for so long that he had forgotten it was a performance at all. His posture said everything his words didn't have to. 23 years of unquestioned command. 23 years of being the most important person in every room he walked into. 23 years of looking at a cabin full of passengers and seeing first and always a hierarchy, and knowing without having to think about it exactly where he sat within that hierarchy which was at the very top of it, and exactly where everyone else sat, which depended entirely on what Bradford Whitmore could read about them in the first 3 seconds of looking. He had looked at the black woman in seat 3B for approximately 3 seconds before making his decision. 3 seconds. That was all it took for Captain Bradford Whitmore to look at her simple navy blazer, her leather tote resting neatly against her leg, her natural hair pulled back cleanly from her face, her complete and total absence of designer logos or visible status markers. The way she held herself quietly and without any of the particular performance of importance that Bradford had learned to recognize and respect, and to conclude with the full confidence of a man who had never once been wrong about something like this, that she was movable. That she was the path of least resistance. That she was the one he could shift without consequence, without paperwork, without any of the complications that came when you misjudged a passenger and found out too late that they had someone to call. What he did not know, standing there with his hat in his hand and his certainty perfectly intact, was that in exactly 17 minutes, the woman sitting quietly in seat 3B would stop his plane on the taxiway, strip him of his wings, and begin dismantling everything he had spent 23 years building. Not with anger, not with threats, not with anything loud or dramatic or visible to the passengers still streaming through the boarding door behind her, but with the specific patient legally devastating precision of a woman who had been preparing for a moment exactly like this one for 24 years, and had never once doubted that it would come. He had chosen the wrong seat. He had chosen the wrong woman. Before we go any further, tell us where you're watching from right now. Drop your city in the comments below, because we want to hear from every corner of the world that this story reaches, and it is going to reach far. And if this story is already hitting differently, if you can already feel what's coming, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and give this video a like, because what you're about to hear is one of those stories that begins with an injustice so ordinary it could happen to anyone, and ends with something that changes an entire industry. Now let's go back to the beginning, to a Tuesday morning at LaGuardia Airport that started like any other and ended like nothing that had come before it. North Star Airlines Flight 1244. LaGuardia Airport, New York. Departing 7:35 in the morning, bound for Atlanta. It was a premium domestic route, the kind that fills up fast with sharp suits and laptop bags and people who have somewhere important to be, and the resources to make the journey comfortable. Gate C11 hummed with the controlled energy of early morning business travel, rolling suitcases, coffee cups, sweating in the terminal air. Boarding announcements cycling through the speaker system every 4 minutes with the patient repetition of a system that had done this 10,000 times and would do it 10,000 more. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, a North Star Airbus. A 320 sat gleaming on the tarmac, prepped and ready. Fuel-loaded crew aboard every one of its 144 seats assigned and confirmed. Business class held 12 seats. Every one of them had been paid for. Every one of them had been confirmed. Every one of them belonged to exactly the person whose name was printed on the boarding pass that matched it. Except as of approximately 6:53 that morning, Bradford Whitmore had decided that one of them didn't. Inside the cockpit, Captain Bradford Whitmore was doing his pre-departure checks, or rather he was doing them in the spaces between a phone call that had come in at 6:48 a.m. and had rearranged the morning in ways that the official pre-departure log would never reflect. The voice on the other end of that call was young, casually entitled, and completely unconcerned with the inconvenience it was causing in the particular way of someone who had never in their life had to be concerned about inconvenience, because inconvenience was something that happened to other people and was resolved by the right phone call to the right person. Tyler Voss, 25 years old. Nephew of North Star Airlines CEO Gerald Voss was stuck in traffic on the Van Wyck Expressway and needed his usual accommodation. He said it the way someone orders food at a restaurant they've been going to for years, not requesting, just announcing a seat in business class up front window if possible. He was running a little late, but it would be sorted. It was always sorted. That was the point of having an uncle who ran the airline. Bradford Whitmore had done this before. Not for Tyler Voss specifically, but for versions of Tyler Voss. The phone calls that came from people connected to people with the kind of names that made things either easy or complicated, depending entirely on which side of them you happened to sit. He had fielded these calls a dozen times across 23 years, and he had developed across those years a quiet system for handling them, a system that never appeared in any official log, never generated any paperwork, never left any trail that could be followed back to him, because Bradford Whitmore had not survived 23 years at the top of his profession by being careless. The system was simple. He would scan the manifest for a passenger who looked like they wouldn't push back a solo traveler, preferably someone without a visible status marker on their booking. No VIP flag, no high-tier loyalty notation, no corporate account that would trigger an automatic escalation if something went wrong. Someone who could be approached by a flight attendant with a vague crew request and a professionally apologetic smile, and would, when presented with that combination, simply comply because the combination of uniform and authority and the word captain had, in Bradford's experience, an almost perfect success rate with the right kind of passenger. He pulled up the manifest on his tablet, scrolled to business class 12 seats. His eyes moving down the column of names with the practiced efficiency of someone running a calculation he had run before. Row 3 seat, B, Dr. S. Adeyemi, solo traveler, standard booking, no flags, no loyalty tier notation beyond basic. He tapped the name and looked at the check-in photo attached to the booking record, the small thumbnail that the system generated from the passport scan at check-in, low resolution, but sufficient for the purpose Bradford was using it for. A black woman alone, simply dressed even in the low-resolution thumbnail of a passport photo. The calculation happened in under 5 seconds, and Bradford Whitmore did not think of it as a calculation at all. He thought of it as reading the room, which was something he had always believed he was exceptionally good at. He thought of it as practical decision-making in service of a smooth operation. He thought of it as the kind of judgment call that senior captains made every day, quietly, without ceremony, in the interest of keeping things running the way they were supposed to run. He did not think of it as what it was, which was a decision made entirely on the basis of what Dr. S. Adeyemi looked like and what Bradford Whitmore had decided that meant about how she would respond when asked to give up something that was rightfully hers. He called Sandra Holt his lead flight attendant, and he did it with the brisk efficiency of a man who has already decided and is simply issuing instructions. Seat 3B, he said. Move her to economy. Quietly. He wanted it handled before the gate opened, before the boarding began, before Tyler Voss came jogging down the jet bridge in whatever outfit he was wearing today. He wanted the seat empty and waiting. He told Sandra to have Camille handle it. Camille Torres, the junior attendant, 3 weeks on the job, still on probation, still in that particular window of new employment where the fear of losing the position is larger than almost anything else. He said Camille's knew she'll do what she's told. Just give her a reason. Equipment issue, weight distribution, whatever holds up for 5 minutes. Just get it done. Sandra said she understood. That was the morning. That was how it started. Bradford replaced his phone, returned his attention to the pre-departure checklist, and felt none of the things a person ought to feel when they have just set in motion a sequence of events that will end with the most consequential mistake of their professional life. He felt instead the calm efficiency of a man who has handled a problem before it became a problem. He felt in the specific way of people who have been protected for so long that they have confused protection with righteousness, completely certain that he had done nothing wrong. He tapped the next item on the checklist. Outside the cockpit window, the tarmac shimmered faintly in the early morning light, and gate C11 was beginning to fill. In the back of a rideshare somewhere on the Van Wyck Expressway, Tyler Voss was not thinking about the woman whose seat he was about to take. He was not thinking about her because the thought had never occurred to him. Not because he was deliberately cruel, not because he had constructed some careful justification for what was happening, but because the machinery of the favor was so smooth and so practiced and so completely invisible to him that there was nothing to think about. A seat was being arranged. That was what happened when you called. The seat appeared. That was the entire transaction from Tyler's perspective, and it began and ended there. He was wearing a yellow designer tracksuit, the kind that costs more than most people's monthly rent and is worn with the specific casualness of someone who has never had to think about the cost of anything. He was laughing into his phone, describing to a friend the meeting he was heading to in Atlanta, the contacts he was going to make, the dinner that was apparently going to be at a restaurant where you needed to know someone to get a table, and Tyler naturally knew someone. His carry-on was rolling beside him with the reckless bounce of luggage handled by someone who has never had to worry about overhead bin space because the seat is always sorted before they get there. He texted his friend in between sentences, "Uncle Rich's guy always comes through. First class sorted." He hit send without looking at it. That text would later appear in full in a federal incident report. Tyler would not know that for several weeks. Meanwhile, at Gate C11, the energy had shifted from the general hum of early morning boarding to something with a specific undertone that a careful observer might have noticed. But most passengers were too absorbed in their own preparations to register. Camille Torres was standing near the gate podium when Sandra Holt's voice came through her earpiece, low and professional and carrying the particular tone of an instruction that was not a request. Camille had received the instruction 90 seconds earlier. In those 90 seconds, she had done 3 things. She had felt her stomach drop. She had pulled up the booking record for seat 3B on her attendant tablet, and she had read it twice because she thought she must have misunderstood something the first time. She had not misunderstood anything. The record was unambiguous. Seat 3B, Dr. S. Adeyemi. Business class, confirmed, paid in full. No flags, no issues. Every field exactly as it should be for a passenger who had booked correctly and done nothing wrong and was owed by every standard the airline officially operated under exactly the seat she had purchased. Camille looked up from her tablet and across the gate area to where Sandra was standing, composed and professional, watching her with the patient expression of a senior employee waiting for a junior one to get on with it. Camille looked back at the tablet. She checked the booking one more time. It was still valid. It was still exactly as it should be. The rent payment was due in 11 days. She had worked very hard to get this job. The probation period was another 4 months. She thought about what Sandra had said. Find a reason, equipment issue, weight distribution. Anything that sounds operational. And she felt the gap between what she knew was right and what she was being asked to do open up inside her like a crack in something she had believed was solid. She was 27 years old, and she was standing at a gate in LaGuardia Airport at 7:09 in the morning with an instruction in her ear and a valid booking on her screen, and 11 days until her rent was due, and she made the choice that the system Bradford Whitmore had built was specifically designed to make feel like the only choice available. She walked toward the gate. She would think about this walk for a long time afterward, The specific weighted feeling of each step, the way the terminal sounds seemed to recede slightly as she moved, the knowledge sitting cold and certain in her chest that she was about to do something she could not undo. She would think about whether there was a moment where she could have stopped, turned around, gone back to Sandra, and said she wouldn't do it. There was. She would understand that clearly later. In the moment, the economic pressure and the authority of the instruction and the 3 weeks of a job she desperately wanted to keep pressed, the moment closed before she could step into it. Outside, through the floor-to-ceiling terminal windows, the North Star A320 sat ready at the gate, its engines cold, its cabin beginning to fill. The morning light fell across the tarmac in long, flat angles, the particular clarity of early April in New York, and somewhere on the Van Wyck Expressway a yellow tracksuit was getting closer, and the favor it represented was already in motion, and the woman whose seat it would take had just stepped onto the jet bridge. Dr. Simone Adeyemi boarded early, as she always did, because boarding early was one of the small efficiencies she had accumulated over 24 years of frequent federal travel, along with always requesting a window seat, always carrying her own water, always having the key documents she needed for the day loaded and readable offline before she ever stepped onto a jet bridge, because the one time she had counted on in-flight Wi-Fi for a federal briefing had been the last time she counted on in-flight Wi-Fi for anything. She moved through the world at a pace that was not hurried and not slow, but entirely deliberate, the pace of someone who had learned across 47 years of being a black woman in spaces that were not designed with her in mind, that composure was not a luxury but a form of armor, a strategic posture, the one thing that the rooms she walked into could never take from her, no matter how hard they tried. She had learned this at 23 in an elevator on her first day of federal employment, and she had been learning it differently every year since, until it had settled into her so completely that it was no longer something she did, but simply something she was. She was wearing a navy blazer over a simple blouse, carrying a leather tote that was good quality but not conspicuous. Her natural hair pulled back cleanly from her face. She wore no jewelry that announced anything. She carried no bag that announced anything. She looked like someone who might be a professor or a non-profit director or a very organized and quietly serious person who traveled often and had learned which things mattered and which didn't. She looked, in short, like someone that a man who judged people by the wrong markers could easily underestimate, and Simone Adeyemi knew this, had always known this, and had spent 2.5 decades doing more consequential work in more important rooms, because of the precise gap between what people saw when they looked at her and what was actually there. She was reviewing a federal compliance report on her phone as she walked down the Jet Bridge Aviation Accessibility and Equity Metrics 71 dense pages that she would need to have thoroughly in her head for the hearing in Atlanta, where she was scheduled to deliver opening remarks before a federal oversight panel at 10:30 in the morning. The remarks were 6 pages. She had reviewed them 5 times. She would review them again on the flight, which was why she had requested a window seat in business class, not as a luxury, though she had long since stopped apologizing for the comfort that her position entitled her to, but because the window seat was quieter, and the business class cabin had the space she needed to work effectively during a 2-hour flight that she intended to use. She found seat 3B, stowed her leather tote in the overhead bin with the neat efficiency of someone who had done this 10,000 times, sat down, opened the federal report at page 44, where she had left off, and let the sounds of a boarding cabin settle into the background around her. The way background music settles, present, unobtrusive, irrelevant to the task at hand. She noticed Camille Torres near the forward galley almost immediately because Simone Adeyemi noticed things as a reflex and had for 24 years, and what she noticed was that the young flight attendant was watching her with the careful, slightly averted attention of someone carrying a secret they didn't choose and weren't sure how to put down. It was a specific kind of watching, not unfriendly, not professional. Something caught uncomfortably between the two, and Simone had seen that particular expression in enough rooms across enough years to know what it usually preceded. She noticed it filed it with the precise mental efficiency that 2.5 decades in federal service had made automatic and returned to page 44 of the compliance report. She did not know yet what was coming, could not have known the specific shape of it, but that particular frequency of awareness that her career had tuned very finely, the frequency that registered something in this space is already wrong, had activated quietly in her chest like an instrument picking up a signal from a long way off, and it did not turn off again for the rest of the morning. Camille walked toward row 3 with the specific weighted deliberateness of someone moving toward something they have already decided is wrong and are doing anyway, and each step had its own quiet cost, and she could feel each one. And she kept walking because the instruction was in her ear, and the rent was due, and the probation had 4 months left, and the combination of those 3 facts had temporarily shamefully overridden the other thing, the thing that knew. She reached 3B. She stood beside the seat. The woman looked up from her phone with the calm, measured attention of someone who had been aware of her approach for the last 30 seconds and had been deciding in that 30 seconds how to respond to whatever came next. Camille opened her mouth and heard herself say, "Ma'am, I'm so sorry to bother you. There's been a seat adjustment and we'd like to move you. We have a lovely seat available in row 16. She heard how it sounded as she said it. Thin, unconvincing, the language of an instruction dressed up in the clothes of an apology, and the apology didn't fit, and they both knew it. The woman looked at her not with anger, because anger would have required a kind of surprise that this woman clearly did not feel, but with the specific patient attention of someone who understood exactly what was happening and was taking her time choosing how to respond to it. She set her phone face down on the armrest. "I'm sorry," she said, and her voice was perfectly level, carrying no heat, no accusation, nothing that could be described as difficult. "Is there a problem with the seat?" Camille's face felt warm. It's not the seat exactly. It's just that we need... Is it a weight and balance issue?" Camille opened her mouth and closed it. "An equipment malfunction," the woman continued in the same unhurried, precise tone. "A safety protocol that requires this specific seat to be empty." The questions were not aggressive. They were simply exact, and their exactness was its own kind of pressure, because each one exposed a little more clearly the gap between what Camille was saying and what was actually true, and there was no good answer to any of them because there was no legitimate reason behind any of them. "It's a crew request," Camille said, finally hearing how insufficient it sounded the moment it left her mouth. "The captain, he specifically requested..." She stopped. She looked over her shoulder toward the cockpit involuntarily, the way people look toward the source of an instruction when the instruction has run out of authority to support it. The woman reached into her blazer pocket and held up her phone screen facing out, and on the screen was a boarding pass, clear, unambiguous. Seat 3B business class, North Star, Flight 1, 244, confirmed with the woman's name printed across the top in the clean, inarguable typography of official documentation. "I have a boarding pass," she said. "If there is a documented operational reason for this adjustment, a real one written down somewhere in the aircraft systems, I will absolutely comply, but I need to hear what it is." Camille looked at the boarding pass. She felt the floor shifting under her, not literally, but in the way it does when you are standing on the wrong side of something important and you understand finally and without any remaining ambiguity that you are standing on the wrong side of it. "Please," Camille said, and the word came out quieter than everything that had come before it. "You're holding up boarding. I am sitting in my assigned seat," the woman said, and her tone was not unkind. It was simply precise, the precision of someone who chooses her words with the same care she gives to everything else. "I am not holding up boarding. If you cannot provide a valid operational reason for this downgrade, I would like to speak with the purser, or with a gate agent, or with whoever has the authority to show me documentation." Camille nodded a small, desperate nod. the nod of someone who has run out of road and retreated toward the galley, and the woman in seat 3B watched her go, set her phone back on the armrest, and returned to her federal report, as if the interruption had been a brief and unremarkable thing, which it was not, and which she knew it was not, but which she chose to treat as such for the moment, because composure, as she had understood for 24 years, was not the absence of feeling. It was the decision about what to do with feeling, and Simone Adeyemi had been making that decision for a very long time. In the forward galley, Camille Torres stood with her back to the cabin and her hands flat on the cold metal surface of the service counter, and breathed slowly the way you breathe when something in your chest is pressing against your ribs from the inside and you need it to stop pressing long enough for you to think. She was 27 years old. She had a rent payment due in 11 days. She had worked genuinely and effortfully to get this job. The application, the training program, the probation period with its careful evaluations and its quiet accumulation of small judgments about whether she was the right fit. She had checked the booking for seat 3B on her attendant tablet the moment Sandra Holt handed her the instruction, and the record had been absolutely clear, confirmed paid. Valid, no flags, nothing that would explain or justify what she was being asked to do. She had checked it twice. She was doing it anyway. This was the mechanism that Bradford Whitmore had built, and it was elegant in the specific way that unjust systems are elegant, not through complexity, but through simplicity, through the reduction of a moral question to an economic one, through the arrangement of incentives so that the person in Camille's position experienced the wrong choice, not as a choice at all, but as the only available option. He had chosen her specifically because she was new. He had chosen her specifically because she was on probation. He had built the system so that the harm would travel through people who couldn't afford to refuse it, so that his hands would stay clean, so that the distance between the decision and the consequence would be wide enough that no direct line could be drawn. It was a very old arrangement. Camille did not have the words for it yet, but she could feel the shape of it, the way you can feel the shape of something in the dark, even when you can't see it. In seat 3. Directly beside the woman Bradford Whitmore had decided was movable. Arthur Pemberton had been watching since the moment Camille first appeared at the row. Arthur was 53 years old, a black corporate attorney with 28 years of practice, and he had spent those years in depositions, in boardrooms, in courtrooms, in every variety of room where something was happening that wasn't being said out loud. Learning to read situations as they unfolded in real time, to identify the structure beneath the surface, to understand not just what was happening, but why and who had decided it and what it meant. What he was watching unfold in real time from the distance of approximately 18 inches was a woman being presented with an arbitrary, baseless, undocumented instruction, and responding to it with the kind of textbook precision that suggested she had been in rooms like this before and understood exactly what they required. He shifted his phone from his lap to the seatback tray, angled the camera slightly toward the aisle, and pressed record quietly without drawing attention, with the practiced ease of someone who understood that documentation was not a dramatic act, but a practical one. He had learned this the same way the woman in 3B had learned it, in the same kinds of rooms over the same kind of time, through the same repeated experience of being in a space where the official account of what was happening and the actual account of what was happening were two different things, and where the only protection against the official account was a record. Across the aisle in 4A, Priya Mehta had her phone out, already angled toward the window for a pre-departure travel video, the kind she made for her audience of 1.1 million followers. Warm, relatable airplane window light. When Camille's approach to 3B caught the edge of her peripheral vision, she lowered the phone but did not stop recording. Now she was watching the exchange with her brow pulling together, and her thumb resting very lightly against the live button not pressed yet. Not yet, but ready. And in the forward galley, Raymond Cole stood in the doorway and did not move. Raymond was 58, a North Star senior flight attendant with 31 years of service, and he had seen the shape of what was happening, not this exact version, but the mechanism underneath it. The same bones dressed in different circumstances twice in the past 3 years. Both times he had stood somewhere near where he was standing now and had not stepped forward. Something in his jaw tightened in a way that had become familiar, the specific tension of a man who knows what the right thing is and keeps finding reasons not to do it. He did not step forward. Not yet. But he did not look away, and the not looking away was for Raymond Cole already something different from what he had done before. Sandra Holt moved down the aisle the way lead attendants move when they have been summoned to resolve a situation that a junior attendant has failed to resolve with a composed, purposeful energy that was designed to communicate authority without communicating urgency. Because urgency implied that the situation was larger than it was, and Sandra's entire professional skill set was organized around making situations feel smaller than they were. She was 8 years with North Star, and she had developed across those 8 years the specific kind of polished professionalism that performs warmth while delivering its opposite, a warmth that lived precisely in the eyes and nowhere further, that communicated attentiveness without actually listening to anything that was designed not to make passengers feel heard, but to make them feel handled, which was a different thing entirely and served a different purpose. She approached 3B with a smile that had been calibrated to this exact situation and said, "Good morning. I'm Sandra. I'm the lead attendant on today's flight. I understand there's been some confusion about your seat. There's no confusion on my end," the woman in 3B said pleasantly, with the particular pleasantness of someone who is being very precise about their language. "I have a confirmed business class seat. Your attendant asked me to move to economy. I asked for the operational reason and haven't received one. The captain has made a specific crew request," Sandra said, keeping her voice in the register of reasonable explanation. "I want to assure you this isn't personal. It's simply a configuration matter that needs to be resolved before departure." "A configuration matter," the woman repeated, and the repetition was so perfectly neutral and so perfectly damaging that Sandra's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Is that documented in the aircraft systems?" "Because I can have my assistant pull the technical records in approximately 4 minutes. The smile held, but with visible effort. "I don't think that will be necessary." "Then I'll need a different reason." Around them, the cabin had grown quiet in the specific way that cabins grow quiet when something is happening that isn't supposed to happen. Not the quiet of inattention, but the quiet of attention. The held breath quality of a room full of people who have stopped what they were doing and are simply watching to see what happens next. The businessman in 2C had closed his laptop. The woman in 4B was watching openly. 3 passengers who had been adjusting their luggage had stopped adjusting their luggage and were standing in the stillness of people who understand they are witnessing something that matters without yet knowing how much. Sandra leaned slightly forward and made her mistake, the small, consequential, clearly captured on camera mistake that she would spend a great deal of time afterward wishing she could take back, and said in a voice just loud enough for the nearest 4 rows to hear, "This isn't a debate. The captain runs this aircraft, and some passengers need to remember that." "Some passengers?" The phrase moved through the cabin differently than Sandra had intended it to. It landed differently on different ears, sank differently into different chests, was heard by different people as different things. But in every ear, and through every version of what it meant, it carried something underneath it that wasn't about seat configuration at all. Something that the passengers in the first 8 rows could feel, even if they couldn't yet articulate it. In 4, Apriya Mehta pressed the live button. The viewer count began its climb, 30, 60, then 100, then accelerating past that as the caption she had typed a single sentence describing what was happening at Gate C11 on a North Star flight right now began to find its first wave of people who would share it further. In 3A, Arthur Pemberton's phone had not moved. Neither had Arthur. His expression had not changed in any way that a casual observer would have noticed, but something behind his eyes had sharpened with the particular sharpening of a man who has spent 28 years identifying in real time when a case is being built, and when he is watching one being built, and who recognizes with professional clarity that what he is watching right now is the latter being built sentence by sentence in the narrow aisle of a business-class cabin by a woman in a navy blazer who has not raised her voice once. Raymond Cole in the galley doorway heard some passengers and went completely still, the stillness of a man in whom something very old has just been struck in a very precise place. He had been flying for 31 years. He had heard language like this before, had heard the shape of it, had understood what it meant and where it came from and who it was for. He had heard it and said nothing twice in the past 3 years. His jaw tightened. He took one step out of the galley. He stopped. He did not go back. In seat 3B, the woman in the navy blazer looked at Sandra Holt with an expression that was entirely composed, entirely patient, and entirely certain, the expression of someone who has already decided what comes next and is simply waiting for the other person to finish. "Please get the captain," she said. Sandra Holt had not woken up that morning thinking of herself as someone who would do what she was doing. This was important to understand about Sandra, not as an excuse, because there were no excuses for what had happened in the aisle of business class in the last 4 minutes, but as an explanation for how someone arrives at a place like this without ever having consciously chosen to go there. She had spent 8 years building a professional identity, organized entirely around smoothness. The smooth surface that prevents turbulence from becoming an incident that redirects passenger frustration before it reaches the level that generates reports that keeps the premium cabin feeling like the premium experience that people had paid for. She was excellent at this. She had been recognized for it. She had been promoted because of it, and she took real pride in the skill of it in the way a master craftsperson takes pride in the reliable precision of what they do. The problem was that the thing she was smoothing over had never in 8 years been named clearly enough for her to look at it directly. She had managed situations, and the situations had involved certain types of passengers being redirected, and she had told herself that the redirections were operational and the operations were standard, and the standards were by definition correct. The hierarchy she was enforcing had become invisible to her in the way that the water is invisible to the fish, not because she couldn't see it if she looked, but because looking directly at the thing you depend on for survival is very difficult, and Sandra had found consistently that it was easier not to. She had calculated before walking out to 3B that the woman in the navy blazer was not someone who would make this difficult in a way that had consequences, not someone who had the right calls to make the right records, to pull the right authority to make the morning land on Sandra's desk as something she would have to answer for. She had made this calculation because Bradford Whitmore had made it first, and she trusted Bradford Whitmore's judgment the way junior people in institutions trust the judgment of the senior person who has never, within their experience, been wrong. She was learning in the aisle of business class on the morning of April 9th that Bradford Whitmore had been wrong many times before she had known him and had simply been protected from the consequences of being wrong by the same mechanisms that were now failing to protect him. Camille Torres stood in the galley watching Sandra's back and felt the specific simultaneous relief of having her burden taken and guilt of having let it be taken, which was a combination that settled into her chest in a way that didn't have a clean name, but that she would feel the weight of in some form for a long time. She had passed the problem to someone with more authority, and this felt like a resolution, and she knew it wasn't, and she couldn't hold both of those things at once. Raymond Cole stood 3 feet from Camille and watched all of it. He watched Sandra walk toward 3B with the composed authority of someone who expected the authority to be sufficient. He watched the passenger respond to every approach with the measured precision of someone who had understood from the first word what was happening and had decided clearly that she was not going to make it easy. He watched the cabin grow quiet in the way that he had watched it grow quiet twice before in 3 years on 2 other flights with 2 other passengers who had eventually complied and left and filed complaints that went nowhere. He had something forming in his chest that he didn't have a word for yet, but that felt like it might be the thing that had been building for 31 years across every flight where he had seen the shape of this and looked away. He did not step forward, but he watched Sandra say some passengers in a voice that 4 rows could hear, and he felt the weight of the phrase in the specific way you feel the weight of something familiar and wrong. And he thought about the 2 passengers from the 2 previous flights, and he thought about where they were now, and he thought about where the complaints they filed were now, and he made a decision, very quietly, standing in a galley doorway at 7:24 in the morning, that today was going to be different. Not yet, but today was going to be different. Captain Bradford Whitmore did not rush. Men like Bradford Whitmore never rushed because rushing implied that something outside of yourself held authority over your time, and the concept of something outside himself holding authority over his time was for Bradford Whitmore essentially theoretical. He had been obeyed for so long by so many people in so many rooms that the expectation of obedience had fused with his sense of self at some point in the last 2 decades and become indistinguishable from it, so that to Bradford obeying him was not a preference or an option but simply the natural state of things, the way gravity is the natural state of things, not requiring explanation or gratitude, simply present. He moved down the business class aisle with the unhurried deliberateness of a man who carries authority the way some people carry their own weather, and he did not make eye contact with any of the watching passengers as he moved, because the passengers were not, as far as Bradford was concerned, a relevant consideration in this moment. They were furniture. The cabin was a functional space, and the passengers were part of its function, and the only object of actual consequence was the problem in 3B that needed to be resolved before Tyler Voss ran out of runway on the Van Wyck Expressway and arrived at the gate without a seat waiting for him. He stopped beside row 3B and looked at the woman sitting in it. What he saw, a middle-aged black woman in a plain navy blazer, a leather tote, natural hair, no jewelry that announced anything, no bag that announced anything, nothing about her appearance or presentation that communicated the kind of status Bradford Whitmore respected or recognized. She looked, and this was the word that assembled itself in his mind, without him consciously choosing it like someone who had gotten lucky, who had points, or had caught a discounted business class fare, or had been upgraded by the system, or had known someone who made a call. Someone who was occupying a seat, not because she had earned the right to occupy it through the visible markers of success that Bradford used to measure such things, but through the accidental generosity of a booking system that didn't know any better. He had looked at her for 3 seconds in the manifest photo that morning and made this calculation. He was making it again now, and he was very confident in it, and this confidence was the last truly intact thing about his morning, and it was about to leave him. What he did not see 24 years of federal service, the specific weight of a Georgetown law degree. A direct line to the Secretary of Transportation, the authority to ground the aircraft he was standing in the patience of a woman who had been underestimated in rooms far more consequential than a business class cabin, and had learned across 4 decades of being underestimated, that the moment someone looks at you and decides you are less than you are, that is the moment you hold all the power, because they have stopped preparing for what you are actually capable of. He didn't see any of it. "Miss," he said, "not ma'am, not doctor, just miss," in the tone of someone addressing a small, manageable inconvenience. "My crew has made a request. Non-compliance with crew instructions is a serious matter on a commercial aircraft." "Good morning, Captain." She glanced at his nameplate with the brief, deliberate attention of someone reading a citation they intend to reference accurately. Whitmore. She said his name the way a federal document cites a statute clearly precisely for the record. "Your attendant made a request. I asked for the operational reason. She didn't have one. Can you provide it?" He blinked. The question had come back to him faster than he expected, with none of the deference he was accustomed to. none of the softening that usually accompanied a passenger's response to his presence. He recovered. "There's a seating configuration issue. It's a crew matter. It doesn't require explanation to a passenger. If it's documented in the aircraft system, she said it does. May I see the documentation?" He stared at her. He was not accustomed to being answered with a question that exposed the gap between what he was saying and what was true. "That information is not available to passengers," he said. "Then I'll ask differently." She did not shift her posture, did not lean forward, did not raise her voice. "Is this a safety issue, a security issue, or a mechanical issue? Yes or no?" The cabin was very quiet. Bradford repeated himself and heard himself repeating himself and did not like either thing. He reached for something he had used before in conversations like this, the weight of disclosed purpose, the admission of what was actually happening reframed as a reasonable institutional priority. "We have a priority passenger arriving momentarily," he said. "This seat needs to be available." The cabin absorbed this. The woman in 3B let a beat of silence sit before she responded. "So this is a courtesy accommodation for another passenger," she said. "At my expense." She paused. "Yes or no, Captain?" Bradford's jaw tightened. He looked around the cabin, registered the phones, registered the silence, registered dimly that this was not going the way it usually went, and made the last mistake available to him. The one that men like Bradford reach for when they have run out of arguments and need something uglier and faster. The one that ends conversations by burning them rather than resolving them. "People like you," he said with the contempt of a man who has abandoned strategy for instinct, always want to turn a simple request into a federal case. "People like you." The cabin went absolutely still, not quiet. Still, the specific electric stillness of a room where something has been said that cannot be unsaid, that has crossed a line so clearly that every person present feels the crossing in their own chest. In 4, a Priya Mehta's viewer count was climbing past 2,000. In 3A, Arthur Pemberton's recording had captured every word. In the galley doorway, Raymond Cole closed his eyes for 1 second and then opened them. The woman in 3B looked at Captain Bradford Whitmore. Her expression did not change. "People like me," she said, her voice entirely steady. "Go ahead and finish that thought, Captain." He didn't finish it, but it was already in the air. It was already everywhere. She took her time. This was important, not as theater, not as a performance of dignity for the watching passengers, but because taking her time was simply what she did and who she was and had been for 24 years. She closed the federal report on her phone with the same careful attention she had given it on the jet bridge. She folded her phone into her tote. She reached up to the overhead bin with the unhurried efficiency of someone who has done this 10,000 times and retrieved her tote without fumbling, without rushing, without any of the visible physical agitation that a person under pressure is supposed to display. She stood, and in standing and in turning toward the forward cabin with the natural ease of someone simply checking whether they've left anything behind, every passenger in business class saw her face clear, unbroken entirely. Certain the face of someone who is not the one making a mistake here. The face of someone who knows exactly what is happening and exactly what comes next and is not afraid of either thing. She said in a voice the entire cabin could hear, and without performing it, without projecting it, simply saying it the way she said everything with precision and without waste. 24 years of federal oversight. "I've seen a lot of things. This morning will be remembered." Then she walked toward the door ahead of the 2 security officers who fell in behind her, and every passenger who watched her go saw the same thing, a woman who had been removed from her confirmed seat without cause or documentation or any legitimate authority, walking out of that aircraft like she owned every inch of the floor she stepped on. In the galley doorway, Raymond Cole took a step as she passed. A single step out of the galley into the aisle forward, and then stopped the step of a man in whom something is breaking that has been straining for a long time. He made eye contact with her as she passed, and she held his gaze for 1 second with an expression that contained no accusation and no anger and no demand. Only the clear, patient, unhurried awareness of someone who recognizes at a glance who is watching, who is seeing, and who might today choose to act on what they see. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He did not go back into the galley. He stood in the doorway and watched her go, and felt 31 years of standing in doorways and watching people go pressing against the backs of his eyes. The jet bridge was 29 steps fluorescent lit and narrow, and Simone counted them not deliberately, not with any plan to count them, but because the mind under certain kinds of pressure becomes a very precise instrument that gathers data automatically, compulsively, as a way of staying anchored to the factual world when the emotional one is pressing in. Other passengers heading to connecting gates pressed against the jet bridge walls as she passed, some watching, some looking quickly away, a few holding up phones. One woman whispered something to the man beside her. A young black man watched Simone walk past with his jaw tight and his eyes carrying the specific exhausted recognition of someone who has seen this before and is seeing it again. The recognition that lives not in the event itself, but in its familiarity. The bone-deep knowledge that this was not a mistake or an anomaly, but a pattern old and built into the walls of the world, and the weight of that knowledge in the eyes of someone who has carried it for years. Simone kept her chin level. She breathed steadily in through the nose and out through the mouth, the way she had trained herself to breathe in difficult rooms for 2.5 decades. The feeling behind her sternum, the weight of public humiliation, the specific burning pressure of being made smaller in front of 144 people on the basis of nothing more than what she looked like, was real. And she did not pretend otherwise, did not perform a composure that required pretending. It didn't hurt, because it did hurt. It always hurt. The same hurt she had felt at 23 in an elevator, and at 31 in a boardroom, and at 39 in a parking garage, the hurt of being seen and immediately unmade. But beneath it, deeper and much older and far colder, something else was activating something that had been building across 24 years of rooms exactly like this one. Something patient and precise and fully prepared. Something that knew exactly what documentation existed and what authority had been violated and what the next step was and the step after that. She opened her phone before she reached the gate. She found Daniel Park and her secure federal contacts. She typed 4 words. "Call me right now." His call came in 9 seconds. She walked through the terminal and carried 4 moments inside her. The 4 that had made her the 4 that she returned to the way a navigator returns to fixed points, not for comfort, not for nostalgia, but for orientation, for the reminder of exactly where she had come from, and why none of this. Not Bradford. Whitmore, not his contempt, not the 29 steps on the jet bridge, was going to be the thing that stopped her. The first moment was the elevator at 23. It was her first day of federal employment. She had a Georgetown law degree in a briefcase alongside her appointment letter from the Department of Transportation. She had spent 3 years in federal compliance coursework and had a brain full of transportation statutes and the specific electrified energy of someone who has worked very hard towards something and is finally on a Tuesday morning in September walking through the door of it. She walked into the federal building on New Jersey Avenue, crossed the lobby, pressed the elevator button. The security guard at the reception desk looked at her, then at the visitor's book, then at her briefcase, then back at her. "Deliveries," he said. "Loading dock is around the side." She was wearing a suit. She was carrying a briefcase. She was reporting to her first day as junior federal counsel. She did not flinch. She showed her credentials, walked to the elevator, pressed the button for the 7th floor, and stood in that elevator for 11 seconds while the doors closed and the car began to rise. In those 11 seconds, she felt the specific weight of being seen and immediately unmade, of walking into a room as herself and being handed back a version of herself that someone else had decided fit better. She had felt it before in different rooms at different ages. But this time she was wearing a suit and carrying credentials that said federal government, and it had made no difference at all. That night on the phone with her mother, she said, "I'm going to make sure this never happens to anyone on a federal carrier." Her mother laughed, the warm, knowing laugh of a woman who had spent 60 years in a country that was constantly discovering her for the first time. "Baby, that's going to take a while." "I know," Simone said. "I plan to stay." The second moment was the boardroom in Chicago at 31. 12 people around the table, 11 of them white men. She had the most thorough compliance analysis in the room. She knew this because she had reviewed every other preliminary submission and had spent 48 hours building something that wasn't just thorough but airtight, and she was proud of it, had earned the right to be proud of it. The meeting chair looked around the table as the session opened and said to no one, and therefore everyone, "Let's wait for the DOT representative before we get started." Simone raised her hand. He looked at her. The quick unconscious calculation crossed his face. She could have narrated his thought process almost word for word, and then he said, "Oh, you're her. Just that. You're her." With the particular surprise of a man who had expected someone else. 2 executives were formally sanctioned as a direct result of her analysis. On the train home, watching the flat gray Illinois horizon, she thought, "They never see it coming. That is the advantage. That has always been the advantage." The third moment was the parking garage at 39. 4 months preparing congressional testimony on airline bias standards. Real data, designed to produce real change. The committee chairman had accepted speaking fees from 3 of the 5 carriers she was testifying about. She did not know this going in. She learned it while sitting at the witness table, watching him redirect her statements, cut off her responses. Talk over her points until the testimony was tabled for further review, which meant buried, which she also knew. She sat in her car in the congressional parking garage afterward for 22 minutes. She did not cry. She was too tired for crying and something else for it. Something that had been building for 16 years and needed an outlet that was not a parking garage and not despair. She found a notepad in the glove compartment. She wrote for 11 minutes. When she was done, she had 23 items on a list, every single thing she would change when she had enough authority to change it. She drove home. She made dinner. She went back to work the next morning. She had been checking items off that list ever since. By the morning of Flight 1244, she had reached number 17. The fourth moment was the phone call at 44. She was in an airport. She was always in an airport, which was fitting, given what she had devoted her career to waiting for a connecting flight at O'Hare when her phone rang, and the name on the screen was the Secretary of Transportation. The offer, Federal Commissioner for Civil Rights and Aviation Equity, Department of Transportation. The most powerful aviation civil rights position in the federal government. The seat across the table she had spent 21 years trying to influence from the outside. She did not feel triumph. She felt weight, the specific serious weight of knowing that the seat was now hers and that every version of herself that had stood in parking garages and elevators and boardrooms and been told in one language or another that she was the wrong person in the right place, every one of those versions was watching to see what she would do with it. She accepted without hesitating. These 4 moments moved through Simone Adeyemi as she walked through the LaGuardia terminal, and they did not make the weight in her sternum lighter. That weight was real, and it needed to be real, but they made her faster and clearer and more certain of exactly what was in her hand and how to use it. And she had been certain of it from the moment she stood up in seat 3B, and she was more certain of it with every step she took toward gate C11. What those 4 moments had built accumulated across 24 years like sediment becoming stone was not anger, though there had been anger legitimate and earned, and it was not bitterness. though there had been years where bitterness was the shape the anger took before she found better uses for it. What they had built was something more useful and more durable than either of those things. It was preparation, specific and thorough, the kind that comes not from expecting the worst, but from understanding with clear eyes and no illusions the full landscape of the territory you are moving through. Simone had spent 4 years as commissioner doing work that lived entirely in that understanding. 14 commercial carriers audited for civil rights compliance, 3 consent decrees negotiated, federal equity training programs mandated in 19 states, a complete overhaul of the passenger complaint reporting structure that had for 30 years made it easy for airlines to receive discrimination complaints and nearly impossible for those complaints to become anything that changed actual behavior. She had the numbers in her head at all times because the numbers were the work, and the work was why she got out of bed, and the numbers were bias-related complaints down 31% in carriers under active DOT compliance monitoring, first-class seat discrimination incidents down 44% in the same carriers, internal airline reporting of conduct violations up 220% following mandatory training implementation. These were not perfect numbers. They were real numbers. And she carried them the way she carried the 4 moments not for comfort but for orientation, for the reminder that the work was landing somewhere, was changing something, even if the changes were slower and harder won than she would have chosen. The specific irony of this morning was not lost on her. She had spent 4 years making commercial aviation more equitable for every black passenger on every commercial carrier operating on American soil, and this morning she was that passenger sitting in a terminal gate area removed from her confirmed seat without cause or documentation, offered $300 and an apology for the inconvenience and the combination of the irony and the word inconvenience, and the $300 voucher and Bradford Whitmore's people like you sat inside her with a very specific texture that was not quite fury and not quite grief, but something made of both things, something that had an edge to it, something that she had learned across 2.5 decades to hold carefully, because it was the most useful thing she owned. Diana Walsh, the gate manager, had arrived at Simone's side with the professional efficiency of someone whose entire job was to prevent situations from becoming what this situation was already clearly and irreversibly becoming. She was 41, sharp-featured, dressed in the North Star gate management uniform, and she mispronounced Simone's last name, Adeyemi, instead of Adeyemi. And Simone did not correct her because correcting her was not the point, and the point was not a name. Dr. Adeyemi, Diana said, extending a hand with a smile, working very hard. I am so sorry for this experience. We want to make this right. What is the airline's official explanation for my removal? Simone asked. She did not shake the hand, not with hostility. She simply had her phone in one hand and her tote in the other, and did not perform the social reflex when there was a question that needed answering. The specific documented operational reason. Diana's smile recalibrated through several settings. Captain Whitmore has the authority to make seating adjustments as part of his command responsibilities. We understand this has been upsetting. What is the documented reason? Not the authority, the reason. I want to make sure we take care of you today, Diana said, finding firmer ground in the language of remediation. We'd like to offer you a seat on the next available flight to Atlanta. It departs at noon, and a $300 flight voucher for the inconvenience. A $300 voucher, Simone said. And then she said in the clear, unhurried, building the record cadence that Diana was beginning to understand was not passenger frustration, but something considerably more precise and considerably more dangerous. For the removal of a ticketed passenger from a confirmed seat based on race with no operational documentation, in front of a full business-class cabin with multiple witnesses and active video recording, your official response is $300 and a 4-hour delay. Diana's professional veneer cracked, not disappeared, but cracked, and through the crack was visible the expression of someone who is beginning to understand that the conversation they are in is not the conversation they thought they were in. "Captain Whitmore's authority is clear in our operational procedures," she said, her tone shifting from apologetic to careful. "I know exactly what authority Captain Whitmore has," Simone said. Her voice was very quiet, "and I know exactly what authority supersedes it." Through the gate window she watched Tyler Voss jog down the jet bridge at 7:46 a.m., yellow tracksuit laughing into his phone, rolling carry-on bouncing beside him with the careless energy of someone who had never once in his life needed to be careful with anything. A gate agent was personally escorting him. He boarded without properly scanning his pass. The agent waved him through with the practiced ease of a reflex, so old it had stopped feeling like a choice, and Simone watched this, filed it, and turned back to Diana Walsh. She walked to the far end of the gate area, away from the North Star staff and Diana's navy blazer, and the officers' careful neutrality, and sat in a row of empty seats facing the floor-to-ceiling window. She watched Flight 1244 push back from Gate C-11. She watched it begin its slow, enormous, certain taxi toward the runway. She thought about the seat she had been removed from, not Seat 3B on an Airbus A320, but the other seat, the one she had spent 24 years earning, the one that sat at the intersection of federal law and commercial aviation and civil rights, and the power to make things right in ways that $300 and a noon flight could not begin to touch. She opened her phone. Daniel Park was still on the line. "Daniel," she said. Her voice was entirely steady. "Here's what I need." Daniel Park had worked with Simone Adeyemi for 8 years, which was long enough to have been calibrated to the specific frequency of her instructions. Direct, sequenced, complete. No repetition, no hedging, no words that didn't need to be there. He had sat across from her in 6 congressional briefings, 3 federal investigations, and 1 particularly unforgettable press conference in which she had calmly, precisely, and on record corrected the FAA administrator on a point of federal statute in front of 58 journalists, and he had learned across all of those experiences that the quieter her voice, the larger the sentence that followed it. He heard the quiet now. He did not ask questions. "Tell me what you need," he said. First, Simone said, "I need Gerald Voss's personal cell, not the corporate line, the personal number." She had recognized Tyler Voss when she saw him at the gate, had placed the face against the name without effort, the specific neural efficiency of someone who maintains a comprehensive working knowledge of the organizational structures of every major carrier in her jurisdiction. "He has a personal number registered with 2 federal compliance offices. I need it in under 2 minutes. 80 seconds, Daniel said, already moving. Second. She was watching the aircraft complete its push through the gate window, the slow drift away from the bridge that meant it was almost too late. Almost. I need you to contact the FAA Command Center and request that North Star Flight 1244, currently on the taxiway at LaGuardia, just pushed from Gate C11, be ordered to return to the gate. The citation is a potential federal crew compliance and civil rights protocol breach. I am formally opening a DOT civil rights investigation as of," she looked at her phone, 7:43 a.m. this date. A pause. "Not hesitation processing." "Simone," Daniel's voice was careful, "ordering the plane back cancels the flight. 144 passengers. A federal commissioner was removed from her confirmed business class seat on a commercial aircraft," she said, and her voice was the voice of someone reading a statute out loud, because the statute is what is relevant here, not the feelings about it. Her seat was given to the CEO's nephew as a personal favor. The captain used explicitly discriminatory language in front of a full cabin with multiple witnesses and active video documentation being live-streamed to several thousand people right now. "Ground the plane, Daniel." 1 breath of silence, exactly 1. "Done," he said. Gerald Voss's number came through 73 seconds later. Simone dialed. He answered on the second ring, the quick, clipped answer of a man with too many calls and not enough hours. The particular impatience of a CEO who has learned to assess in the first syllable whether a call is worth his full attention. Voss. Mr. Voss. She used her full title with the measured precision of someone loading the right instrument for the job. This is Dr. Simone Adeyemi. I am the United States Federal Commissioner for Civil Rights and Aviation Equity at the Department of Transportation. The quality of the silence that followed was almost audible, the specific recalibration of a man who has received a call that requires a completely different register of response from the one he had prepared. Dr. Adeyemi. His voice had dropped, become careful, become the voice of a man who is now paying very close attention. Good morning. What can I do for you? You can tell me, she said, while your Captain Bradford Whitmore on North Star Flight 1244 at LaGuardia removed me from my confirmed business class seat at 7:38 this morning. She walked him through it, the timing, the seat, the non-existent documentation, the $300 voucher as the airline's official response, the exact words Bradford had used in front of a full cabin. She let each item land before moving to the next. When I was told that a priority passenger needed the seat, she said the passenger who boarded in my place was Tyler Voss. I believe that is your nephew, Mr. Voss. The silence that followed was longer and had a different quality entirely, the quality of a man watching a wall collapse piece by piece, understanding as each piece falls exactly what had been holding it up. My nephew Gerald said. The words came out flat, depleted, carrying the weight of someone who had known somewhere beneath his awareness that something like this was always a possibility when you had a nephew like Tyler and a captain like Bradford and a culture like the one North Star had built. Your nephew Simone confirmed. Who called Captain Whitmore directly, who asked Whitmore to remove a paying passenger from her confirmed seat. And Captain Whitmore chose me. He looked at the manifest, saw my name, looked at my booking photo, and decided I was the passenger who would offer the least resistance. She paused. He was wrong about that, Mr. Voss. I am currently at Gate C11. Your aircraft is on the taxiway. I strongly suggest you take the next call you receive very seriously. She hung up. At 7:55 a.m., the departure sign above Gate C11 changed from departed to delayed. 4 minutes later, it changed again at gate. A door behind the gate desk opened, and a man walked through it who had not been there 20 minutes earlier, moving with the fast contained energy of someone who has received a call that required him to be somewhere he very much did not want to be, as fast as possible. The plane was coming back. Inside. Flight 1244 on the taxiway. Tyler Voss was in seat 3B with his fold-down tray extended champagne glass resting on it, thumbs moving across his phone with the effortless speed of someone who has been communicating primarily through a touchscreen for the better part of a decade. He was texting his friend about the Atlanta meeting, describing the seat, describing the champagne, describing the smooth and unremarkable process by which the seat had materialized as it always materialized through the right call to the right person, as if by a natural law that applied specifically to people in Tyler's position. He had not thought about the woman who had been sitting in this seat before him because the thought had genuinely not occurred to him in the same way that the electricity in a wall doesn't occur to you. When you plug in a phone, the infrastructure is simply there. The accommodation is simply made, and the person who was displaced to make it is simply not part of the picture, because the picture as Tyler had always experienced it did not contain those people. He posted a photo of the champagne on his social media champagne glass on a fold-down tray, first-class cabin in the background, the caption, first class always, and watched the comments come in fast. He did not notice that 4 of the comments contained links to Priya Mehta's live stream, which had at that moment crossed 11,000 viewers, and was climbing with the particular acceleration of content that has found the precise nerve it was looking for. In seat 3, Arthur Pemberton was not looking at Tyler Voss. He was looking at his phone and at the window and at his phone again, with the contained, precise energy of a man doing several things simultaneously in his mind that required his complete attention. Priya's caption had been reshared 1,400 times. The comment section was producing a single repeated question with the insistence of something that wanted very badly to be answered. Who is she? Does anyone know who she is? Who is the woman who walked off the plane and Arthur, reading through it, could see the information being assembled in real time by several thousand people who had recognized something important about the woman in the navy blazer, without yet being able to name what it was? He had his own answer forming. He had 28 years of knowing what he was looking at. He had the video. He had the time stamps. He had been in enough rooms to understand with professional certainty that what he had witnessed in the last 30 minutes was not a passenger dispute and not an airline inconvenience and not the kind of thing that was going to be resolved with a voucher and an apology. He was very still, which was what Arthur Pemberton looked like when he was doing his most important work. In the cockpit, Bradford Whitmore was running through the post-departure checklist with the practiced ease of a man who has done this 6,000 times. And he had not thought about the woman in seat 3B for 9 minutes, because the matter was resolved. The seat was occupied. Tyler was aboard, and the flight was moving. And resolved, matters did not require further thinking. He felt the clean efficiency of a morning brought under control, the satisfaction of a problem managed before it became a problem, and he was feeling this satisfaction with complete sincerity when the radio crackled. North Star 1244. This is LaGuardia Tower. You are directed to return to gate C11 immediately. FAA directive in effect. All taxi clearances revoked. Bradford stared at the radio with the expression of a man receiving information that his mind is refusing to process in real time because the information contradicts something he has believed to be true for 23 years. His first officer looked at him. Bradford picked up the radio, kept his voice level with the professional discipline of someone who does not under any circumstances let his voice betray what his face is doing. LaGuardia Tower. This is North Star 1244. Be advised, we are on the taxiway approaching runway position. Please clarify the nature of this directive. North Star 1244, nature of directive not available at this time. You are ordered to return to gate C11. Comply immediately or face credential review. His first officer was watching him very carefully. Bradford gripped the controls and complied in his hands and in his voice and nowhere else, because in every other part of himself he was running a rapid and increasingly alarmed analysis of what had just happened, and the conclusion he was arriving at, still incomplete, still not seeing the full picture, still catastrophically underestimating the woman he had removed from seat 3B was she called a hotline. He said it out loud with the contempt of someone who believes they are dealing with a minor escalation of a resolved matter. His first officer did not respond. The plane turned. In seat 3B, Tyler Voss had stopped texting. He had felt the change in direction. He called his uncle. No answer. He called again. No answer. He texted twice with escalating urgency and received nothing back. He flagged Sandra Holt, who was moving past with an expression that was no longer performing warmth at all. Technical delay, she said without slowing. He watched her keep walking and felt for the first time that morning the specific discomfort of being in a situation he did not know how to resolve with a phone call. The plane turned back toward gate C11 with the slow, heavy inevitability of something very large that has been redirected by a force considerably larger than itself. The passengers felt it before they heard the announcement. The change in motion, the slowing, the particular quality of an aircraft that is not doing what it was supposed to do next. The subtle wrongness of it that traveled through the cabin like a current running just beneath everyone's feet and produced in the space of about 4 seconds. A collective shift in attention from phones and laptops and the preparation for sleep to the windows and to each other. Bradford's announcement came through the cabin speakers with the practiced smoothness of a man who has made 10,000 departure announcements and knows exactly how to make his voice communicate one thing while his situation communicates another. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a brief hold on the taxiway. We'll have an update for you shortly, and we appreciate your patience. Smooth professional calibrated to produce nothing, no questions, no anxiety. Just the temporary acceptance of an unexplained pause, which Bradford had found across 23 years passengers were surprisingly willing to provide, if the voice asking for it was confident enough. The passengers who had not been watching Priya Mehta's live stream accepted this. The passengers who had been watching it did not. Priya herself was watching the viewer count 16,000, now climbing in the irregular surges that meant the stream was being picked up by new audiences in real time, shared from feed to feed with the momentum of content that has landed somewhere true. The comment section was moving too fast to read linearly, but she could see the shape of it, the outrage, the recognition, the repeated question of who the woman was, and then appearing in clusters. What appeared to be an answer offered by different commenters drawing on different sources converging on the same name. In 3A, Arthur Pemberton had seen the name in the comments before Priya had, because Arthur had been looking for it with greater precision and greater relevant context. He read it and was very still for a moment, and then he looked out the window at the tarmac, and then he looked back at his phone, and something in the quality of his stillness changed. Became less the stillness of a lawyer building a case, and more the stillness of a person who has just understood the full scale of what they have been sitting 3 feet away from all morning. Tyler Voss tried his uncle a third time. Voicemail. He put the phone face down on the tray, which meant the champagne was now sitting beside a phone, and he was looking at neither of them, which was a significant behavioral change for Tyler Voss, who had been looking at his phone essentially continuously since boarding. He leaned toward the window and watched the tarmac moving past in the wrong direction, and felt something unfamiliar, the specific discomfort of consequences that could not be resolved by a call. In the cockpit, a second communication arrived, not from the tower this time, but from Harold Reeves North Star's senior station director patched through on the crew channel. The call was short. The voice was flat. The message was 3 sentences: return to gate comply immediately. Do not contact crew members or passengers regarding the reason. Bradford heard the third sentence. Do not contact crew members or passengers regarding the reason, and felt the first full and genuine wave of something that was not quite fear, but was adjacent to it. The specific chill of beginning to understand that what you thought was a minor situation has been for some time something considerably larger, and that the largeness of it is only now becoming visible because you are already inside it. He docked the aircraft. The jet bridge connected with the particular mechanical thunk of something large finding its place. The cabin door was opened by a ground crew member, and then Harold Reeves boarded, moving down the aisle without looking at the passengers, without pausing, with the fast contained energy of a man doing something that he does not want to take any longer than it needs to take. He walked to the cockpit door. He opened it without knocking. He looked at Bradford Whitmore and said, with the flat finality of someone delivering a verdict that has already been decided at a level well above this conversation, "Get your hat, Bradford. You're off the aircraft." And Bradford Whitmore, for the first time in 23 years, did not immediately know what to say. Bradford argued. Of course he argued. Argument was as natural to him as breathing, and the specific argument of a man whose authority has been challenged was as practiced and as reflexive as the pre-departure checklist. He said the grounding was irregular, said his command rights had been violated, said the passenger had been non-compliant, said this was exactly the kind of overreach that undermined the operational authority that safe commercial aviation required. He said it with the conviction of someone who has been saying versions of it for 23 years and has always been on the right side of the resulting conversation. Harold Reeves waited. He had the patience of someone who had been doing this long enough to recognize an argument that has already lost without knowing it yet. When Bradford finished, Harold said, "The passenger is a federal commissioner, Bradford. The DOT investigation opened 14 minutes ago." He paused. "Get off the plane." The color change happened in stages, and each stage was its own kind of revelation. First the blink and the slight headshake and the reflexive "that's not." That didn't get finished because Bradford's throat stopped producing it before it could become a sentence. Then something heavier and slower comprehension arriving like something being lowered from a height, the beginning of understanding, not yet complete, not yet showing him the full picture, just showing him enough of it to feel what the full picture was going to feel like. Then the specific cold of the thing that lived just on the other side of comprehension, the first genuine physical recognition of exactly what he had done and to whom. He came down the jet bridge with his hat in his hand and his credentials still on his lanyard, and his face doing the specific work of a man who is trying to maintain the appearance of composure while composure is leaving him from the inside. The passengers who had been asked to deplane the flight had been canceled, an announcement made, apologies offered, rebooking assistance promised moved past him in the narrow bridge, some watching him openly, some holding up phones, some looking quickly away with the careful neutrality of people who have witnessed something and aren't sure yet how to be in the presence of what they witnessed. He had never in 23 years been watched like this. He had been the one doing the watching. He had been the presence that organized the space around itself and determined the terms on which everyone else existed within it. Being watched, being the subject of the watching, the thing being documented and recorded and assessed, was a disorientation that had no precedent in his experience, and he had no equipment for it. Tyler Voss was removed through a side door by a gate agent who would not make eye contact with him, and the yellow tracksuit moved quickly through the terminal and disappeared into the general population of LaGuardia Airport, and whatever Tyler was feeling about that would take considerably longer to fully arrive than the 53 seconds it took to make the walk. In the gate area, Simone Adeyemi was standing. She had not gone to the customer service desk to plead for a new flight. She had not raised her voice or posted anything on social media or done any of the things that the situation, if Bradford had understood it correctly, would have required her to do. She had sat in a row of empty chairs facing the tarmac window and made 2 phone calls and waited with the patience of a woman for whom patience is not the absence of action, but the most disciplined form of it. And now she was standing in the open area between the gate desk and the seating rows, with the quiet, settled composure of someone who has arranged herself exactly where she intended to be. Around her, the assembly had formed Harold Reeves arriving from the aircraft, the North Star legal representative Clifton Reeves on his phone, Arthur Pemberton, who had come off the plane deliberately and specifically, and was standing to one side with his phone and his 28 years of knowing what he was looking at. Priya Mehta with her phone raised and her live stream running at 31,000 viewers. Raymond Cole, who had walked off that canceled flight and across the jet bridge, and was standing 15 feet from the gate desk with his hands at his sides and his 31 years of looking away, arriving at their end. Bradford emerged from the jet bridge and stopped. He looked at the woman he had removed from seat 3. B. The woman in the navy blazer, the leather tote, the natural hair, the complete absence of markers he had used to calculate that she was movable, and he looked at the people arranged around her, and he looked at the way the room had organized itself around this woman. He had spent the entire morning deciding, did not matter, and his mouth opened, and no sound came out. Simone did not move toward him. She let him come to her. He covered the distance with the heavy, lead-footed steps of a man walking toward something he cannot stop, and he stopped 3 feet away, and she looked at him, and she spoke first. She did not raise her voice. Every word was calibrated for the specific purpose of being heard by every person in earshot, and every person in earshot was listening with the particular quality of attention that fills a room when something important is about to be said, and everyone present understands that they will carry it with them for a very long time. Captain Whitmore. She named him clearly, precisely for the record. 41 minutes ago, you removed me from my confirmed business class seat on a commercial aircraft. You provided no operational justification. You stated that people like me cause problems. She paused, and the pause had weight. And you replaced me with a non-manifest passenger, the airline CEO's nephew, as a personal favor. Is that an accurate account of this morning's events? He said nothing. A sound moved through the watching passengers and the watching gate area. Not quite a gasp, not quite a murmur, but the specific collective sound of a room in which a sentence has landed in the precise place it was aimed. The sound of multiple people feeling the same thing at the same time and recognizing the feeling. From the edge of the crowd, Raymond Cole stepped forward. He moved with the deliberate, unhurried certainty of a man who has made a decision and is not reconsidering it, and he moved to a position that placed him clearly, visibly, unambiguously on the side of the gate area where Simone Adeyemi was standing, and he addressed her directly in a voice the whole gate area could hear. I'm Raymond Cole, Senior Flight Attendant, North Star Airlines, Flight 1244. I want to go on record. He did not look at Bradford. He looked at Simone, and his voice was steady with the specific steadiness of someone who has finally done the thing they should have done before and knows it and is not going to let the knowing stop them from doing it now. I witnessed everything that happened in that cabin. I am prepared to testify to every word of it. 31 years. He had been waiting 31 years without knowing he was waiting, and the step was smaller than he had imagined it and heavier than he had imagined it, and both of those things were true at the same time. Simone received his statement with a single nod, not warm, not cold, simply acknowledging the acknowledgement of someone who has been keeping track and adding this to the record. She reached into her leather tote, slowly, without drama, without performance, with the unhurried ease of someone retrieving something they have carried for years and know exactly where to find. She removed a slim, flat credentials wallet, dark blue leather, a gold federal seal embossed on the cover worn at the corners in the way of something that has been in a lot of rooms and opened in front of a lot of people. She held it up at the level where it could be read clearly by anyone looking. I am Dr. Simone Adeyemi, she said. I am the United States Federal Commissioner for Civil Rights and Aviation Equity at the Department of Transportation. My office is responsible for enforcing federal anti-discrimination law across every commercial carrier operating on American soil. That jurisdiction includes North Star Airlines. It includes this aircraft. It includes this gate. It includes this morning. Bradford Whitmore's knees bent. It was subtle, barely visible, the fraction of an inch that is the difference between standing and not quite standing, but Arthur Pemberton, 6 feet away, saw it with the clarity of 28 years of watching rooms, and Priya Mehta's camera caught it the slight forward bow of a man whose foundational understanding of the world has just been removed from beneath him. He reached for the gate desk with one hand, and his knuckles went white against the edge of it, and he stood there in his uniform with his captain's hat in his other hand and his 23 years of authority dissolving around him like something water-soluble left out in the rain. He had looked at her clothes, and her tote, and her hair, and the absence of every marker he recognized as evidence of importance. He had looked at all of those things and assembled from them a complete and confident portrait of a woman who could be moved, who would comply, who would accept the $300 voucher and the noon flight, and become by the end of the day a complaint number in a system that did not follow up on complaint numbers. He had been wrong about every single element of that portrait. He had been wrong in a way that was now federal documented, live-streamed to 31,000 people, and opening in his chest like a wound. I didn't know who you were, he said. It was the only thing left, the only defense available to a man who had spent his entire career making decisions about who people were in the first 3 seconds of looking at them. Simone looked at him and said the thing that every passenger in that gate area would carry forward, the thing Arthur Pemberton would quote verbatim in his federal testimony 7 weeks later, the thing that Priya Mehta's viewers would screenshot and share until it became its own headline, separate from the story that contained it. "I know you didn't," she said. "That is the entire point, Captain. You are not supposed to need to know who I was. You are not required to treat a passenger with dignity only when they hold federal credentials. You are required to treat every passenger with dignity, every single one, and that is not a courtesy, that is the law, and you broke it clearly, deliberately, and on camera." The gate area was silent. Harold Reeves stepped forward and took Bradford Whitmore's airline credentials, the ID lanyard, the operational badge, the access card that had opened every North Star cockpit door for 23 years, right there at the gate desk in front of everyone, watching with the quiet formality of a process that left no room for argument. Bradford held them out. His hand was not steady. "Suspended pending full federal review," Harold said. "Do not access any North Star operational systems. Do not contact any crew members involved in this incident. Do not travel on any North Star aircraft until further notice." A pause. "Is that understood?" Bradford said yes, with the hollow voice of a man who has misplaced himself entirely. The staff room off gate C-11 was small and plain white walls, a table, 4 chairs, a window that looked out onto the taxiway where 45 minutes earlier, North Star Flight 1244 had been slowly making its way toward the runway, carrying a favor that had cost more than anyone in its business class cabin had imagined. Simone sat on one side of the table with a legal pad and her phone and the unhurried, precise energy of someone who has a great deal of work to do and intends to do all of it. Camille Torres came in first. She sat in the chair across from Simone carefully, as if the chair might reflect the weight of the morning, and she wasn't certain she deserved to sit comfortably in it. She was 27, and she looked in this moment younger than that the specific youthfulness of someone confronting the gap between who they believed they were and what they had done when it mattered. Her hands were clasped on the table. She had decided walking down the hall that she was going to be honest, not because she was confident it would protect her job, because she was not confident of anything, except that she had spent the last hour in the forward galley of a canceled flight thinking about the woman who had given her an out, and she had not taken it, and the only thing left that felt like the right thing to do was to tell the truth about why. "Tell me," Simone said in your own words, "what Captain Whitmore said to you before boarding this morning." Camille looked at her hands when she spoke, then made herself look up. "He called me over during pre-boarding about 30 minutes before the gate opened. He had the manifest on his tablet. He pointed at your name, Dr. Adeyemi, seat 3B. She kept her voice level. He said she's the one. Move her to the back quietly before Tyler gets here. I asked if there was a documented reason. He said to tell you it was a configuration issue, and if you pushed back to say it was crew policy, and then he said, she paused, and the pause had its own weight. He said, if I couldn't handle one simple instruction, my probation review wasn't going to go well. He planned this before I boarded, Simone said. Yes, he knew exactly who he was asking me to move. He chose you specifically. Camille's voice had thickened slightly. I checked your booking the moment Sandra gave me the instruction. Everything was valid. I knew it was wrong. I knew it, and I still... She stopped. Her jaw worked. I should have refused. Simone looked up from the legal pad. You were placed in a position designed to make the right choice feel impossible, she said. Her voice was not harsh and not gentle. It was exact, the precision of someone who wants the truth delivered clearly and received clearly. That was not an accident. What you have told me today on record takes real courage. Your employment is federally protected from any connection to this incident that is a legal mandate, not a preference. Camille exhaled the long, shaking release of someone who has been holding something for an hour and has finally been given permission to put it down. "Thank you," she whispered. "Do better next time," Simone said. "You'll know how." Raymond Cole came in next. He sat differently from Camille, spine straight, hands flat on the table, the posture of a man who has made a decision before entering the room and is not going to unmake it. He spoke before she asked a question. "I want to say something first." "Go ahead," Simone said. He looked at the table, then at her, then at the table. When he spoke, his voice had the specific steadiness of something that has been held back for a very long time and is finally being allowed to move. "I have been flying 31 years. I have been on Bradford Whitmore's crew 6 times. I have watched him do what he did this morning, not always this openly, not always with this much aggression, but the same mechanism, the same calculation, the same decision about who doesn't belong in a premium seat and how to move them quietly." He paused. He calls it gatekeeping. When he says it out loud, which he does to the people he trusts, which I have apparently stopped being, he calls it gatekeeping the premium cabin. He says business class has a standard that it's his job to maintain. He let that sit, by which he means certain people don't belong there, and he finds ways to move them. Simone was writing steadily. He targets solo travelers, Raymond continued. Women traveling alone. Passengers of color without the visible markers of the kind of status he respects. I filed 2 internal complaints in 4 years. Both were reviewed by his union. Both were marked unsubstantiated. He is a senior captain. He was protected. He paused again, and this pause was longer. I have looked away more times than I can stand to count. "Why are you not looking away today?" Simone asked. Raymond was quiet for a moment. "Because I saw your face when you walked off that plane. And I recognized it. I have had that face when someone decides what you are before you've opened your mouth." He looked at her directly. "I should have stepped forward this morning. I took 1 step and stopped. I am not going to stop again." His testimony, typed and signed and entered into the federal incident record, ran to 7 pages. It named Bradford Whitmore. It named dates and specific incidents. It named the union representatives who had received the prior complaints and the HR director who had signed off on the unsubstantiated findings. Arthur Pemberton's formal statement took 40 minutes and was built with the architectural precision of 28 years constructing legal arguments. He cited every timestamp. He annotated every exchange. He identified 4 specific federal statutes by number, explaining in plain language what each one covered and how Bradford's conduct had violated each one. He noted Sandra Holt's "some passengers" remark. He noted the complete absence of any operational documentation at any point in the exchange. Before he left, he stopped at the door. "I've been that passenger," he said. "Versions of this different room, someone looks at you and decides before you've said a word. The difference most of those times is that no one else in the room said anything." He paused. "I wanted to be different today." "You were," Simone said. Gerald Voss arrived at Gate C-11 at 8:31 a.m. He was gray-faced and sharp-eyed and moving with the focused, deliberate energy of a man who has spent the drive over understanding clearly and without the comfort of ambiguity that the only variable still within his control is how he behaves in the next 10 minutes, and whether that behavior is enough to matter. He saw Tyler in the terminal food court as he crossed his nephew half-standing, starting to raise a hand in greeting, and Gerald kept walking. He looked through Tyler the way you look through something that is in your way when you do not have time for it to be in your way. Not now. 2 words flat without breaking stride. Tyler sat back down. Gerald stopped in front of Simone, extended his hand. His grip when she shook it was firm, not the grip of a man performing authority, not the practiced handshake of a CEO used to being in control of who receives his full attention. but the grip of a man performing accountability, which is a different physical thing, heavier and less comfortable. "Commissioner Adeyemi," he said, "there are no words for this that are adequate. I am appalled. I am cooperating fully. Whatever you need." "Your apology is noted," Simone said, her voice neutral, not warm and not cold. "The investigation proceeds regardless." She looked at him with the steady, unhurried attention of someone who has received apologies from powerful men in corporate settings for a very long time, and has learned across all of those apologies that the apology itself is the least informative data point available. What matters is what follows it, and that is what she would be watching. "Sit down. There's work to do." Clifton Reeves, the North Star legal representative who had been circling the edges of the scene with the practiced, smooth energy of a man whose entire professional value lay in making large corporate disasters feel considerably smaller than they were, attempted twice to insert himself into the conversation. The first attempt was a suggestion that the situation was being viewed through an understandably emotional lens. The second was a reference to the possibility of a remediation framework that might be worth exploring before the situation became more formalized. On the second attempt, Simone held up one hand. He stopped. "Your client," she said, "has 30 seconds to communicate through you whether North Star Airlines intends to cooperate fully and immediately with this federal investigation, or whether your client would prefer to answer these questions in a congressional subcommittee hearing, with full media presence and the complete incident record on the public table. Please make a call." Clifton Reeves made a call. The call lasted 85 seconds. When he turned back, the smoothness was still present, but it had a different texture. The smoothness of surrender rather than the smoothness of a man who believes he still has room to maneuver. "Full cooperation," he said. "Whatever is needed." The evidence package already assembled on the table between Simone and Gerald was not a document that left room for the kind of conversation Gerald Voss had perhaps imagined having on the drive over. It contained Camille's testimony on record confirming that Bradford had planned the removal before boarding and had named Simone specifically. It contained Raymond's testimony on record documenting a multi-year pattern of conduct that predated this morning by at least 4 years and involved at least 3 prior incidents. It contained Arthur Pemberton's video, clear, clean audio. Bradford's exact words, his face fully visible, the cabin's response visible in the background. It contained Priya Mehta's live stream, now public record, with a viewer count that had crossed 40,000. It contained the airline's own manifest data, showing Tyler Voss's last-minute insertion with no booking record. And it contained Bradford Whitmore's full personnel file pulled by Adriana Santos in Washington in 47 minutes, using the authority of a formal federal investigation and which contained buried in union-reviewed records that a federal subpoena made suddenly and completely accessible 4 prior complaints from passengers. Different passengers, different flights, same calculation, same mechanism, same assumption about who would comply. All 4 had been marked unsubstantiated. None of them had resulted in any action. Gerald Voss looked at the folder with the expression of a man reading a sentence he had written himself a long time ago, by allowing certain things to be true about his company without requiring them to change. Simone placed 4 documents on the table and walked him through each one without ceremony and without negotiation, because they were not proposals. They were the terms of the investigation, and the manner of compliance was the only remaining variable. A full 5-year audit of all discrimination complaints against senior flight staff, mandatory civil rights and equity training for all 31,000 North Star employees designed by her office, funded entirely by North Star. The creation of an independent passenger rights office reporting directly to the DOT, not to North Star's executive team. Immediate suspension of Bradford Whitmore's pilot license, pending FAA review. She placed a 5th document on top. Your nephew's name is in the federal incident record, Mr. Voss. He accepted a seat he knew belonged to a removed passenger. That is documented and it is public. How you address that within your family is your business." She looked at him steadily. "But it is in the record. Gerald Voss signed all 4 documents." He looked as he signed like a man paying a debt he had allowed to accumulate for a very long time. The federal fine arrived at North Star Airlines headquarters by certified courier on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after Flight 1244, and it was $2.9 million, the highest single civil rights penalty ever levied against a domestic commercial carrier. The legal team had known it was coming. The number was still larger than what anyone on the legal team had prepared for, which was itself a data point about how thoroughly they had misjudged the severity of what Bradford Whitmore had done on a Tuesday morning at Gate C11. The consent decree that followed required 5 things simultaneously, and with no negotiation on sequence or timeline, the full 5-year audit of discrimination complaints against senior flight staff. Mandatory 8-hour civil rights training for all 31,000 employees from the CEO to the ground crew. The Independent Passenger Rights Office, staffed by people hired through a process designed by Simone's office and reporting directly to the DOT with no North Star intermediary. A public acknowledgement of the incident posted on North Star's website and held there unchanged for 1 full year. And an annual civil rights audit whose findings went directly to the Department of Transportation. Total financial impact of the fine, the legal costs, the implementation of the decree, and the stock drop that followed. Priya Mehta's clip going fully mainstream, estimated at just over $1 billion. The stock recovered over time. The culture began to change slowly, unevenly, in the way cultures change when the people within them start to understand that the old rules have been replaced by something with real consequences attached. Bradford Whitmore's pilot license review was not the kind that moved quietly or resolved favorably. The independent evaluators had Raymond's testimony, the 4 prior buried complaints, Arthur's video, and Bradford's complete conduct file. Their recommendation, filed 26 days later, was unambiguous suspension, pending psychiatric evaluation, a conduct audit, and a federally mandated equity training program of no fewer than 180 hours. Reinstatement, they noted, is not expected to be recommended. The pilots' union held a vote on whether to pursue an appeal. The vote was not close. They had seen the video. They had colleagues of color partners, children, and they did not want their union's name on the defense of what Bradford Whitmore had done in Seat 3B. The appeal was not filed. Sandra Holt's termination letter cited 2 things: complicity in a documented federal civil rights violation and the use of discriminatory language in a public setting, captured on video and confirmed by multiple witnesses. The phrase, "some passengers need to remember," that was quoted verbatim in the letter. She appealed through the North Star HR process. The appeal landed on the desk of the newly constituted Independent Passenger Rights Office, staffed by people who had read the full incident report and watched the video, and was denied in 9 days. She eventually found a position in hotel guest services, and in the small daily choices of that work, in the 100 small moments of deciding how to see the person in front of you, she became something different from what she had been. It was slow. It was real. Diana Walsh was walked out of Gate C11 on a Wednesday afternoon. Her access badge deactivated the $300 voucher she had offered as North Star's official response to a federal civil rights violation cited by name in 3 separate newspaper editorials. The word inconvenience italicized in all 3. She did not forget the editorials. She was not supposed to. Tyler Voss's name appeared in the public DOT report in full. The report was findable in 11 seconds by anyone with a search engine, which eventually included the hiring manager at the mid-sized marketing firm that gave him his first real job, without cross-referencing federal aviation incident reports. He showed up on time. He did the work. His manager found him quieter than she had expected, more careful. The habit of calling people to arrange things he hadn't earned had become something he could feel the shape of, feel it as something with a cost that could reach forward through time and take things he hadn't imagined were takeable. He was learning. It was slow. It was real. 6 months after Flight 1, 244 internal reports from North Star crew members flagging the behavior of colleagues were up 540%. Passenger bias complaints were down 68%. These numbers were not perfect. They were real. And in the Independent Passenger Rights Office, a team of 11 people reviewed them every week and sent a summary directly to the Department of Transportation, directly to Dr. Simone Adeyemi's desk. Bradford Whitmore did not understand the full scale of what he had done on the morning of April 9th until he watched himself do it. He watched Priya Mehta's clip in a motel room the night after his suspension on a phone screen in a room that smelled of carpet cleaner, and the particular institutional loneliness of a space where no one has left anything personal behind. He watched himself walk down the aisle with his hat in his hand. He watched himself say "people like you" with the specific contempt of a man who has said something like it before and expected it to work. He watched the cabin go absolutely still, and he watched the woman in the navy blazer ask him with perfect composure and without any anger to finish his thought. He watched himself not finish it. He sat with the phone in his hands for a long time after the clip ended, and felt something he had not felt in 23 years, which was the experience of seeing himself clearly from the outside, without the buffer of his own certainty between him and what he actually was. The man in the video was not protecting a premium cabin. The man in the video was not making a practical operational decision. The man in the video had looked at a woman for 3 seconds, assembled from those 3 seconds a story about who she was and what she was worth, and had used the full weight of 23 years of institutional authority to act on that story, and had been catastrophically, publicly, federally wrong. He had been wrong that morning. He understood sitting in the motel room that he had been wrong in the same way every morning before it in every previous version of the same calculation with every previous passenger he had decided in 3 seconds was movable. He had simply never been shown it before. He had been protected by his union and his seniority and the quiet structure of a complaint system built to absorb rather than transmit from ever having to see himself this clearly. His wife watched the clip 3 times. She had been married to him for 19 years, married to the specific prestige of a senior captain's life, the uniform, the schedule, the particular gravity of a profession that carried its own weight in any room. She had built her sense of their life around a version of Bradford she had chosen to believe. The clip showed her a different version, and after the 3rd viewing she made a phone call to a family attorney that she had not made after the 1st or the 2nd, which told her something about what the 3rd viewing had settled. The fine arrived by certified mail on a Thursday, $45,000 personal, not covered by the airline, not dischargeable, sent in an envelope that he opened at a kitchen table in an apartment he had rented after the house was sold in a building where nobody knew what he had done and nobody asked. He sat with the envelope and the paper and the number for a long time, and the sitting had a specific quality that he hadn't experienced before, the quality of receiving something that was entirely accurate. The pension he had spent 23 years building was forfeited under the terms of his suspension agreement. He could not fly commercially in the country. 6 months after Flight 1244, Bradford Whitmore was working a night shift in a dispatch building at a small regional cargo operation in northern Montana, reading weather data into a radio for pilots he would never meet on routes he would never fly. A young woman named Torres called in one night on a return leg from a remote supply run. He read her the wind speed and the approach angle and the temperature differential for her destination strip. She said, "Thanks, Bradford," with the complete flat indifference of someone who could not imagine why she should think twice about the voice on the other end of the radio, because, as far as she knew, it was just the voice on the other end of the radio. He held the microphone after she clicked off. The building was cold. The single window looked out at a horizon that was dark and flat and enormous. He had flown an Airbus A320 across this country hundreds of times. He had walked through airports in a uniform that made people step aside without being asked. He had been, without ever examining it, certain every morning of his professional life that he was the most important person in every room he entered. He had been wrong about that every single morning. He had simply never, until seat 3B at gate C11, been shown it. He put the microphone down. He picked up the log sheet. He filled in the boxes. Outside, through the window, a plane he would never board crossed the dark sky from south to north, its wing lights blinking steadily and without ceremony against the cold, carrying its passengers where they needed to go. 6 months after Flight 1244. Simone Adeyemi rebooked herself on the same route, same airline, same departure time, North Star, Flight 1244, LaGuardia to Atlanta, 7:35 a.m. Daniel Park said her name in the particular tone he used when he was concerned and was trying to express it without overstepping. She said, "The decree is in place. The training is complete. The independent office is operating. I need to see whether it holds." He was quiet for a moment, and then he said he would have her secure line ready. She said she wouldn't need it. She carried the same leather tote. She wore the same navy blazer. She moved through gate C11 at 7:19 a.m. with the deliberate, unhurried pace that was simply how she moved through the world, and the ghost of the previous morning was present in the terminal in the way that the memory of a physical thing lives in the body, not as thought, but as sensation, the specific pressure behind the sternum, the count of 29 steps on a jet bridge, the sound of passengers pressing against the walls. She breathed through it steadily the way she had trained herself to breathe in difficult rooms, and she walked to the aircraft door. Camille Torres was standing at the cabin entrance in the greeting position, a new policy part of the transparency protocols written into the consent decree. All North Star crew visible and accountable at boarding, and she was standing with the easy, grounded confidence of someone who has passed through something genuinely difficult and come out the other side, knowing considerably more about themselves than they knew going in. When she saw Simone, something moved across her face. Recognition warmth, the expression of a person who was changed by a specific morning and is grateful for the change, even though the morning was hard. Commissioner Adeyemi Camille said, and her voice was warm and steady. "Welcome aboard." "Thank you," Camille Simone said. She meant it simply, directly, the way she meant most things. The new captain was standing at the cockpit door. Captain Rosa Guerrero 43. The first Latina captain on North Star's flagship route, compact and precise with 20 years in aviation, and the particular self-possession of someone who has earned every hour of it through weather systems and crosswind approaches, and the accumulated discipline of a career built on qualification rather than connection. She had been given this route because she had 280 more flight hours than the next most qualified candidate, and the new independent review process, one of the things Simone's investigation had required, meant that qualifications were now the only criteria, full stop. She extended her hand when Simone reached the door. "Commissioner Adeyemi," she said, and her handshake was firm and unhesitating. "It is a genuine honor." She dropped her voice slightly, not conspiratorially, but with the directness of someone saying something she has decided to say. "This airline owes you something that a fine and a consent decree can't fully cover. But we are trying every day. I want you to know that." Simone held her gaze. "You are the trying Captain Guerrero," she said. "Keep going." She stepped into the cabin. Seat 3B, window seat. She stowed her tote in the overhead bin, sat down, opened the federal compliance report at item 17 on a list she had written in a parking garage 8 years ago. Raymond Cole came down the aisle with the pre-departure cart and stopped at 3B, and they looked at each other across the small, ordinary space of an airplane row, the woman who had finally stepped forward and the woman who had made it matter, and Raymond said, "You look like you're already working," and Simone said, "Always." And he poured her water and moved the cart forward. The boarding door closed. The jet bridge retracted. Captain Guerrero's voice came through the intercom, warm, clear, authoritative, welcoming every passenger aboard as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world, which it was supposed to have been all along. Simone looked out the window as the aircraft pushed back from Gate C11. She thought about Item 17. She opened the report and turned the page. The tarmac moved slowly past below the same concrete Bradford Whitmore had taxied across 6 months ago, certain he was the most important person on it. The plane turned toward the runway. The engines built. And then lived the specific, clean, weightless moment when the ground releases and Simone Adeyemi in seat 3B did not move. She had never been movable. The morning light came through the window clean and direct, and she turned the page. If this story moved you, if you felt every step of that jet bridge, if you believe that dignity should never depend on what someone assumes about you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and subscribe to our channel so you never miss a story like this one. Stories of justice, strength, and what people are capable of when they refuse to fold.